Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our discussion around the movie Parasite. We are going to be digging into this very fun movie. What a wild ride, right?
Definitely. Yeah. This is like my first time seeing Parasite. I mean, I'd obviously heard great things about it and like given it won all the awards. So I kind of got to see like what the hype was all about. And I've got to say, it definitely lived up to it for me, at least. It's always interesting kind of watching like movies in another language. It's not something I do often, but I am a big anime fan, so it wasn't like too big of a jump, and I watch all my anime subbed. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, there was a lot of depth to this movie. Of course, in our time frame, we're not going to have the chance to address the totality of the impact, but we'll certainly try to capture as many of the important parts as possible. Um, so, as far as starting off with some of the psychological impact, right? What I believe that the executive team wanted us to take away was, for one, it talks about class in capitalism. It's a system that sort of disconnects us all from each other. There are some themes that we're going to talk about consistently through the DPI around that disconnect. But there is sort of a parasitic relationship between the classes, right? So the extremely impoverished, they'll do almost anything to be able to remove themselves from the circumstances that they're in. But that's reciprocal, right? The extremely wealthy will also prey on the willingness of the impoverished to stay impoverished. So they sort of require them to disconnect from their lives entirely to cater to them when they're brought into their circle. One of the scenes that I feel like this is illustrated best in was after the family had that very traumatic night. They went back to their home and then saw that it was then flooded out. They had to go and stay in a facility. And then, they got calls from the Park family summoning them to a birthday party, right? Well, in any other person's circumstances, that's a no, right? I can't not make it. Absolutely not. But they sort of felt that they had to in order to be able to, like, their livelihoods depended on that. And so, it's unfortunate, but that's sort of the class society that we live in nowadays. This is illustrated through a movie that's in South Korea, but certainly something that we can relate to here in the United States as well. So that was one of the main points that I felt like it was necessary to take away. Just side note, I kind of went into this movie blind. I don't know if anyone else did, because I didn't really want to know much about the movie. And I will say something about the opening music on it. The music in the opening scene, when I first heard it, it was suspicious to me, right? Because it actually sounds a little bit like Saw. And I was like, wait, what is this? Like, this movie didn't seem like this. And so, as we're kind of moving along through it, I kept thinking about, well, why did it sound like that? And we kind of got an inkling for the reason why it sounded so, why it created all of that tension. So, while we're on the topic of music, Kareem, what did you find as our music specialist?
Okay, so what I found in music this time is a combination of the instruments they played and more importantly, the title of the music. So if you are to look at the soundtrack, like in the actual like soundtrack and the names of it, you'll see a recurring word which is called conciliation. So like they have, and it's a trilogy, like there's the song called Conciliation 1, Conciliation 2, and Conciliation 3. So the fact that this word is chosen to be repeated means that there must be some significance to it. So when you look up the definition of the word conciliation, it means like the action of stopping someone from being angry or placation. That's one, but the one that really stuck out to me is the action of mediating this oh my goodness, the action of mediating between two disputing people or groups. So that definition struck me out because this movie Parasite is essentially a conflict between two groups. We have the Parker family, who are like the rich family, and the Kim family, who are the poor family trying to get in. It's also what's also important to note is that as the conciliation one, conciliation two, conciliation three, a new instrument is added to each beat. And these new instruments kind of symbolize like a new character being added. So for conciliation one, now what I'm gonna say is kind of some additional third-party research, but it is something I noticed when I was watching the film. So, and when I look back on it, I was like, oh, it kind of makes it cool. So when it comes to conciliation one, it kind of starts like right after the family plans to get the son in to be the English tutor. So this beat kind of the song, the Conciliation Trilogy, will play every time the Kim family schemes to get into the Parker family, basically. Right. As I say, okay, now we're gonna get you in, we're gonna get you in, like this beat kind of plays. And it's just really interesting. I think kind of just creates more to like the symbolism of the movie because this is a very heavily symbolic movie and kind of is a movie that's really made with a purpose. So as we see with Conciliation One, it kind of this kind of starts like in a little D major, according to this article. With
That's very
Conciliation Two,
specific.
what we see is it's a whole thing, right? So in Conciliation One, we hear a lot of bells, and the bells really represent Ki Woo. And with Conciliation Two, there's now added like a strings, like violins. I can't exactly point out which string instrument it is, but it's a string instrument, and this is believed to represent Ki Jung. I don't know if I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the names right, but basically, to make a long story short, the music conciliation basically represents every like time a new family is going to get into the Parker. And with conciliation between conciliation one, conciliation two, and conciliation three, they add a new instrument, and these new instruments represent another character joining in kind of the mischief, if you will. But also just the name, just the fact that they decided to call it conciliation, what kind of means to mediate between two disputing groups, kind of speaks to the overall narrative of the movie, which definitely focuses on like class and inequality. But that's my take on music in this movie. But yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, there was definitely a lot of tension in that movie. I don't know how everyone else felt, but the wildest ride for me was watching that housekeeper when she finally got the bunker open and go down the stairs, just thinking about the camera work in that. So there was, some tension there. And then there was also the camera work in that scene. We were running down the stairs, then we make a left and we're running down the hall. And it's just like, where are you going? First of all, like, who are you screaming at? She's like running down the hall screaming, honey. And it's just like, I know there is not a whole person in this basement and you have not been here for days. Like, what is happening? So there was, there was a lot of tension around that aspect. So, in our camera work specialist and editing specialist is absent today, but we have prepared some notes around some of the other scenes or the other camera work aspects that we felt were important.
Yeah, so something that I found very interesting about the camera work was that it was a lot of wide angles. They really wanted to show the specificness of the class divide. You always see something kind of in the middle between, the poor and the rich. And on top of that, there's also work with lighting that, combines with the camera work. Whenever you see the Kim family trying to move upwards, they see that, it's light, it's bright, there's more of an aura of happiness and warmth. And whenever we're seeing them in their, their natural state, which is them being poor, it's very dark, very nuanced. There's no warmth in it because they're so cold just because of they're freezing. They're freezing, they're cold, they're, stuck in this place of not having the opportunity of wealth, not because of any of their, personal failings, more so just because of their, the circumstances that they were left in life. They're all very smart, but whenever they're in their home environment, it's dark, it's dreary, and it's gloomy because they are in this poor place. And on top of that, just a lot of the camera work is showing the background in a portrait mode. Kind of, if you have an iPhone, you see the portrait mode. It's blurry, but you can still see the details of it. So when we see, the two young men speaking to each other, although they are the focus, the camera work still shows behind them, the luxury of, his Italian motorcycle, and still the dreariness and the darkness of the alley that they basically live in. And there's a constant separation. You know, when they're sitting in their apartment, there's the separation of the man who is urinating outside of their apartment. He is part of that wealthier class who is living this life of luxury. And he's in this lighter setting, whereas they're kind of just looking on and kind of wishing that they could have the freedom to do those things. So I think the camera work is really just symbolic of the class struggle. You know, when you are poor, you see things in a darker way. There's no, you know, there's no uptick like there is when you're in a richer family. So that's what I saw that was interesting with the camera work.
Yeah.
That's really good. That was a good catch there. I noticed, so, you know, in doing a little bit of research, I saw that someone took the time to count that there were 960 shots moved using the film rather than the standard 1250. And so it's interesting because that using that wide angle camera, it seems like that sort of allowed him to still be able to keep our attention, as well as not do those freaking cuts that we've sort of talked about in class that, you know, help to contribute towards the ADHD society that we sort of live in now. But it also helped us to really dig into the home, that gorgeous home, right, Evan? It looks, you sort of connected the aspects between the camera work and the way that we were able to look at the park's beautiful home. So, you know, what did you sort of take away from the mise-en-scene as well?
Well, the mise-en-scene was really just beautiful because when you look at the park's home, everything is shiny, it's new, it's upscale, even down to honestly the decorations that they have in the background. Everything kind of speaks to their life as, you know, these upper class people who have the luxury of putting whatever they want wherever. And it's completely the opposite in the Kim home. You know, everything they're doing or everything they have is very much like run down. It's messy because they don't have the time to clean, you know, whereas the park's home is very much so clean. The Kim's home is dirtier because they're working their lives away. You know, that we see stacks of boxes and things like that, pizza boxes. We also see just, you know, the walls are very, almost looked sort of like they're about to get mold. You know, flashing lights flickering. It's not taken care of, which is, you know, the commonality of a poor home. The lamps that are in Kitek's house, we see there's variations in like their arrangement and their contrast, but they're all kind of just extremely different. And so that's just what I took away from the mise-en-scene. Is just there's so many shifts between the Park's home and the Kim's home in terms of, you know, cleanliness, in terms of, you know, newness. It almost looks like basement lighting in the Park's home or in the Kim's home. And then like in the Park's home, it's just like fluorescent, bright, you know, what you would expect to see in an upper class society's family.
Yeah, another thing that I kind of saw with that in terms of the mise-en-scenes and the camera work was when you get a pan of the house, of the Park's house, you see that they have all of these big mirror, like everything is either a window, glass, and including like their front door, it's glass. Around the kitchen area, it's glass. And that kind of allows natural light to come in. So it makes the house look even more rich and more expensive because you have all of this glass, like bringing out the material that's inside the house, and it's bringing out the nice and shiny things that are within the house, the decorations that they have. Everything looks very polished, and I think that's kind of due to the lighting as well.
That's a good point. And you know, if we're even looking at the Kim's house, they I mean, it, as Devin had mentioned, it was so carefully crafted for us to really dig in on just how poor they were, right? And it's crazy to think that, you know, they were not the poorest in their society. There were people that lived even more below them, both, you know, in class and physically, right? Because they were in a sub basement. I thought it was interesting, you know, they're in a sub basement at the bottom of the hill, that, as we can see, you know, the way that the flooding got into their house. And it's one of the things that I noticed is like they had to go up to get to their toilet, like up the steps. That's something I've never seen before. I'm sure that that's an accurate depiction of their society. It's probably for technical and plumbing reasons, maybe, to sort of help with gravity, to be able to get things flowing how they're supposed to. But to find out that there are people living even below the plumbing level, and it's like, what does that say if they're walking around on land that's even lower than sewage and lower than the sewage in their own home? Like, what are they really trying to present to us? Well, now, again, we're talking about accurate depictions in society versus the way that this is portrayed in the movie, but maybe there's some intermingling there when it comes down to that class aspect. So really good catches there.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of ties into how the parks, like towards the end, you hear them talking about the way that the people in the lower class smell. They smell like the basement, and they smell like people who ride the subway. And it's almost kind of like, it helps you understand why they're so apprehensive about, I guess, talking to Mr. Kim. I think it was Mr. Kim and I'm not sure, the tutor, I forgot his name.
You're talking about Kevin.
Kevin, yeah. Like with Mr. Kim and Kevin, they were talking recklessly about them, how they smell and how it's hard to be around them. And even the little boy, he was saying, oh, they all smell the same. And it was kind of reminiscent to, I guess, where they live and how below class that they are, like their class system of how they're living and where they live, and specifically in that region in their society. And I felt that was kind of interesting as well, because I never really got that from, especially not in America, where people are like, oh, he's lower class because he smells like the subway. Like, it's very different for me, especially because you don't hear that in America. Like,
you're right,
rich people can be musty too. Poor people can be
absolutely
like Gucci all the time. Like, it's very difficult to, I guess, sense that.
No, unfortunately, no, it's not. Unfortunately, I kind of have a experience with I have like my own experience about like kind of rich people thinking like poor people smell bad. But we're not going to talk about that. But I do think it is kind of interesting how the movie almost seems to, unlike a lot of like high-end film, will tend to be like abstract of like, okay, what do you think they're talking about? What do you think they're trying to do here? One thing about Parasite, which I really liked, is they have a very clear message, in a sense, or if not a message, a very clear theme, right? Like, they make no mistakes of what this movie is going to talk about, what we're going to focus on, which is class, and lack of better words. But I also find it kind of interesting how like the last two big pieces of Korean cinema, filmography, of Korean media that blew up in the United States, it both focus on class in relation to both Squid Game and and Parasite.
Yeah,
good point. When people are working towards, I guess, in an extreme impoverished, let me backtrack. As Black students that go to a Black university, I'm sure that a lot of us can sort of relate to this next point of Black flight. It's something that we don't really talk about much, but it's definitely something that I feel like it impacts our communities, where we may, make it out of impoverishment, or never been in impoverishment, but if you were and you make it out of impoverishment, you sort of, you move into your middle class home, into your middle class neighborhood, and you sort of detach from some of those things previous to society, but previously that was, your world. And so I found it interesting that this happened so quickly for the Kims. They got a little taste of it, right? So they went on the parks went on a little camping trip just for a couple of hours, and they were in the home. I mean, they had their feet up on the couch, they were drinking their liquor, they were eating their food. And it's almost like as if they forgot that they were poor, not in the sense of like they were having a good time, but in the sense of like they truly forgot, right? when it's raining outside, did it not occur to them, you guys live at the bottom of the hill? I'm sure that flooding is something that they've dealt with before. Nobody thought, we need to go home and check on our house to make sure that it's flooded, right? It's just crazy how they got a little taste of it and they immediately forgot, because they were like, oh, we're home now. And it's just like, no, baby, this is not your home. Like, you have to go home at some point and you need to make sure that it's still there. You know, so I just find it interesting that it even sort of touches on some of those sensitive areas about what it's like to be impoverished and sort of trying to move out of that. I don't know if y'all kind of saw some of the same things, or you feel adversely about that comparison.
I think it was easy for them to do that, though, especially the sister Jessica, because they were talking about it. They said, well, if anything, Kevin was saying, if anything, this isn't really meant for me, but Jessica, this life seems it's built for you. I mean, she had her feet up in the tub, she was watching TV, she figured out how to work the TV remote and everything. And it was almost kind of like, it was kind of refreshing for them, like the Mr. Kim, Mrs. Kim, and Kevin, because they're not used to this. But Jessica, it almost felt like it was a second nature to her, which I felt was kind of weird because they grew up in the same place. So I was like, why is it second nature for her and it's not second nature for them? So that was kind of something that I kind of like thought about as well watching it.
The battle of nature versus nurture kind of comes into play there with that point. Did you also notice too that she was the one that when they were making the pizza boxes for the local pizzeria, they were saying that 1 out of every 4 of them was done wrong, and then they all looked at Jessica because they knew that she was the one who messed it up. It's almost as if like she couldn't even do manual labor. Like, I mean, this is your life, baby. You have no other choice. You're poor.
Like, she's not built for it.
She just wasn't built for it. Exactly. Very good catch. Very good catch. So speaking of when it comes down to the acting, there was a lot of shine from a lot of the characters in the movie. What were some of the takeaways that you all had around some of the acting and the scripting?
I felt that the acting, especially from the madam, was very on point. The madam, Mrs. Parker and Mr. Parker, they were very on point. And considering the fact that they're supposedly oblivious, even though Mr. Parker is like a tech genius from what the former maid had said, he's supposed to be this tech genius, but he's oblivious to the fact that this entire family, this poor family, is outsmarting them in ways that he can't even imagine. On top of that, they took his financial records, all of that, from just him running out of employees in their way of swindling them into getting more acclimated with the family, which I thought was very interesting. And
why would you need a deed to get a housekeeper, right? I thought that was so crazy.
Yeah, I thought it was ridiculous because if anything, you just need to know where the house is, if she's going to be living there, her pay rate, that's about it. And it was very unsettling to watch because it's kind of like she just went with it because Mrs. Parker wasn't used to, I guess, doing manual labor or having to wash dishes. Like, we saw her washing dishes in the sink, or not washing dishes, washing clothes in the sink, doing laundry in the sink. And I thought it was very weird because most people don't really do that. I don't know if that's their way of doing it, but to me, I thought that was very weird because she had this big sheet above the sink and she was washing it in the sink, and it was very weird. But as well as Mr. Parker, it's very like, you can see that he's not as sharp when it comes to, I guess, recognizing the game that they're playing as well.
That's crazy. With it, and it I guess it even further perpetuates the stereotype or the notion of why do we even have class? You know, if this family, I guess it's more about perpetuating the access to opportunity. You know, they could have been, if with an even level starting point, they could have been just as the Kims could have been just as successful as the Parks, because they were scheming and, you know, very planned, and they were able to present themselves as, you know, different from their actual circumstances, despite not having, you know, college educations and things like that. So I just found that to be interesting, and that was a really good catch as well.
Yeah, I also found one of the main parts that kind of evolved and helped, I guess, elaborate and emphasize the theme was the fact that they kept turning up their nose about the way that the Kims smelled and the way that they dressed and what kind of soap that they use. It was very interesting because you hear the little boy talking about it, you hear the mom talking about it, you hear Mr. Park talking about it, and you also hear the maid talking about it once or twice. And it was very interesting because, again, like I said, you don't hear people in the United States saying, oh, you smell like the sewage, you smell like the subway. And it was a very important line in the story, and especially in the script, because it kind of helps you focus on why they're saying, oh, you basically smell poor. Like you don't smell like somebody that would, I guess, be working for an upper class or a middle class man.
Yeah, there's a for the class distinction is even further. Like in the United States, I feel like we're I don't want to say much more of a hygienic society, because that's not the right thing to say, but more so as, even if being poor is not going to prevent you from being hygienic, unless you're like extremely, like if you're extremely impoverished, then perhaps. But you know, for you to be able to have a job and still not be able to afford to smell decent, you know, or not smell at all, maybe even let's talk about the absence of smell, you know,
right,
that's probably the standard baseline, you know, for someone who is, you know, in a poor circumstance, is that they have an absence of smell. They're able to keep themselves clean enough to where their smell is not in what's the word I'm looking for, like it's not intruding on someone else, but at the same time maybe they don't have enough to grace everyone with a pleasant scent.
Yeah.
So good point. Who was the parasite?
I would say it's the poor family. The poor family is a parasite, kind of like sucking out the life of the richer family.
Which one? The Kims or the former housekeeper / husband in the basement?
I would say the Kims, just because it was such a meticulous act of like, okay, one of you's gonna go. Now another you's gonna go. You're kind of just one out of the other, you're just kind of there. Like the housekeeper and her husband were already there, you know, they were doing that thing, like, but the Kims were making it such a large, like that's where the focus was, is, you know, placing themselves in that home and, you know, kind of manipulating their way into a lifestyle that they've never been able to have.
Yeah, I definitely think it's the Kims. I mean, just by like that one line, when they're in the house and they're chilling, drinking their wine, their alcohol, all of that. And they say the son is talking about the daughter of I forgot her name, the daughter of the Parks, of Mr. and Mrs. Parks.
Guys,
Kevin was talking about marrying the girl, and it felt meticulous because it was like, this was your best friend's girlfriend that he was waiting for, and you say that you really like her, which I don't feel that way, because his face the whole time was kind of like blank. And for someone that you really like, you feel like you would light up a little bit, like your face would be lighter and you feel happy. But to me, I just didn't get that. So it kind of felt meticulous and calculated, because now this girl's like head over heels for this guy. And the family is now talking about, oh, if you marry this girl, this is the life that we could be living.
So to give you a follow-up question to that point, do you think that Min, which was Kevin's friend who asked him to tutor, do you think that he asked him to go because he felt that he was the safest person to send. Like he didn't want to send his college buddies. He's like, oh, I don't want them fawning all over her. But it was really because he thought there's no way she would actually fall for a guy like Kevin. Like, what do you think that was the case? Or do you think that Kevin was just trifling because his friend had already put, you know, his sort of mark on that girl as if she was supposed to wait for him, even though he didn't tell her?
Yeah, he definitely, he said the words, I feel safer for you to be with her than for any of my other friends. Plus you're smarter than those people. So it was kind of like he was, I guess, complimenting him so he would take the job. And then Kevin was like, I'm going to do my own thing. And he just fell for the girl, which I still don't feel like that's the truth. To me, it just didn't seem like they had that chemistry.
Awesome.
Plus he walked off too soon. Like he left her hanging and then ended up in the basement with his head smashed in. So it was kind of like
his life. Regardless of whether or not he really actually liked her, she really liked him.
Yeah, and then at the end of the movie, you see that he's no longer with her, and after suffering like a brain injury, you think he would go see the person that he loves the most besides his family.
Yeah,
even though he is grieving from his sister, but still, you think that he would seek out that person, considering that he loves her or likes her so much.
Right. How about you, Kareem? What would you say? Who was the parasite in the movie for you?
I think everyone was a parasite in the movie. I think I can make a legit argument that everyone's the parasite. The Kims are probably the most obvious. As everyone here pointed out so far, they're the ones who really sent them, who really kind of inserted themselves in the lives of the Parker family, with the one by one was like kind of in the meticulous con game in the long run. But the husband living in the bunker is also a parasite. I mean, you're using another family space to hide out from a loan shark. And that brings bad business to them. So if the loan shark had ever caught up with the husband one day, that brings a whole other set of problems. But the Parks are also parasitic in their own way, but they're not necessarily parasitic in the sense of we're gonna come like rob you, but in a sense they need other people to kind of do basic things that parents should do, such as like teach their kids, kind of take care of them, feed, cook, and to be in that sort of position, you're extracting labor from other people. You're basically taking people away from presumably their families and saying, hey, you take care of my family.
A lot of deep symbolism with this movie. Well, we are at our time for the show. Any closing notes before we wrap this up? Go watch Parasite.
Second. Yeah, go watch Parasite and really just examine the way that, we live life in a society of class structure.
Thanks, Devan.